This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Woman of Steel, a memoir of child abuse survivor with universal truths and deep insights. The authors, Mary Meissner, Marilyn Lee. Woman of Steel is the memoir of Mary growing up in a hostile home, enduring rape, beatings, slave-like conditions, and atrocious abuse by a mother who wished she had never been born. Her story begins at the end of World War II in farm country in New York. Mary also tells of her private moments, including the paranormal and visits with a favorite extra-terrestrial. She tells her intriguing story demonstrating her will to not just survive the harsh conditions she finds herself experiencing and what she did to overcome it all so she could thrive. Readers will weep for Mary as she suffers untold cruelties inflicted upon her by her parents, and will wonder at the paranormal experiences that give Mary comfort, and will feel Mary's anguish when she allows herself to feel her own pain in her private moments. And readers will cheer her on when Mary stands against her abusers, each time increasing her power for herself. Happy to have Marilyn Lee, one of the authors of Woman of Steel, a memoir of a child abuse survivor with universal truths and deep insights, join me now here on Speaking of Writers. Marilyn, welcome to this program.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And hello to all the listeners out there.
So how did you come to know Mary?
I met her in church. She was a speaker in church, and eventually we met in church and visited, and we became friends. And she asked me to come to a seance.
So what exactly is a seance, Marilyn?
A seance, which I didn't know, I'd only heard the word before, is when spirits of people who typically have lived and are disembodied but are spiritual and they want to guide people, like angels or spiritual guides, that kind of thing. In a seance, there's a gatekeeper, and in this case it was Chief Many Feathers, a gatekeeper who allows different spiritual beings to come through Mary and speak through her to individuals sitting in the room. And they address each person in the seance with personal truths or insights or helpful information for future or events that are scheduled to happen to that person so that person can be prepared.
So you met Mary at church and through church. So how did you come to write her story?
Well, we had become friends and neighbors, as it turned out, and I would come over for coffee on Saturday mornings, or sometimes after work, I'd come over for a glass of wine, and she would just talk about her life. This event happened, and oh yeah, that reminds me of when this happened. We shared our lives, and I thought her experiences were so different and unique. And I was fascinated, and I thought, this needs to go into a book. This needs to be shared. So that's how it came about.
What is your background, Marilyn?
My background is I was in business. I was a banker for Wells Fargo for about 18 years. I sold investments, so I was licensed. And then also at the same time, I taught college classes at the community college that's local here. Did that for about 15 years.
How did you become a writer?
I was inspired. It's like there's angels, or an angel was behind me and said, look, you've got to write this. And I'm going, what? And said, no, you have to write this. Sit down and start writing. So I went to the computer and I just started writing. And my first book is one we talked about last time, the Camp of God's Tears. And then when I was friends with Mary and I was learning about her life, I said, no, we've got to write this down. So what I did is I taped her stories and then I transcribed them and put them in chronological order. So that's how I wrote her book.
Now, did you write the book together with Mary?
No, she is not cerebral. She is just just spiritual and didn't finish high school, has no real education. And so she didn't have the patience that it takes to sit and write for hours, which I do. I was just dedicated. So, no, I just taped it and then transcribed her stories.
We're chatting with Marilyn Lee here on Speaking of Writers. Her book, Woman of Steel, a memoir of a child abuse survivor with universal truths and deep insights. The story of Mary Meissner is out now and available at Amazon.com. What were your thoughts about this woman?
Well, I was fascinated because I didn't know anyone like her before. She grew up on a farm and had extremely abusive child life until she finally stood up to her parents, and the abuse and the beating stopped. They would whip her with a horse whip, and the blood would run, and then her mother would do that, and then her mother would hand the belt to her father and say, "Now you beat her." And so it was double punishment for just being. They didn't like it that she was a medium. That frightened them. And she finally stood up to them when she was around 12, and it stopped. She put a stop to the abuse.
Now, how do you think Mary being a medium and psychic, how do you think that helped her through this?
She had angels being supportive of her, and so she was able to have that support that wasn't coming from parents, and that's basically what got her through all that. Is the angels and Chief Manyfeathers and different spirit guides and so forth helping her. And she would go sit out under a tree. She had a favorite tree in the backyard, and she would put her head in her hands and cry, and then an angel would come and comfort her, and she would hear truths in her head, and so she was able to get through that kind of a childhood with angelic support.
And what is Mary doing now, Marilyn?
She's retired, and so she just stays home. Her husband still works, and she doesn't do any readings now. She used to do readings for people, and before she was married, she did that for her livelihood, and did it for years and years. And now she's just retired and enjoying her life.
And what would you like readers to take away from this book?
To know that regardless of how much abuse each person might have suffered, when you stand up for yourself, you can put a stop to it in whatever way is appropriate for you, and to know that there is a better life that you can make for yourself. And so it's important to know that other people have done this and come to thrive, and so can you. And
Marilyn, what is next for you in your writing?
I don't really know. I only write when I'm given the assignment spiritually. I'm waiting. I haven't received any prompts other than just, I wrote some short stories, which I published this last year, of true stories that happened to women that I know. One of them was me, that an event happened in their early life. Something happened that changed the course of their life forever for the good. And so that's my last book. And if the story comes up, I will write it.
Well, this book is out now. It's Woman of Steel, a memoir of a child abuse survivor with universal truths and deep insights. The author is Marilyn Lee, and it's the story of Mary Meissner. It is available at Amazon.com. Marilyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for your time and your interest, and thank you to all the listeners.
And this is Speaking of Writers.